All right. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today, coming to you live from the Explorers Club in New York. You might hear a tiny echo because we're on the 5th floor in the map room. It's got nice high ceilings, so there might be a little bit of echo there in the background. We are celebrating World Ocean Week. So we have over 16 live events coming your way. It has been a crazy, jam-packed week connecting with scientists, researchers, explorers, filmmakers from all over the world. They've been taking us into their explorations, to their documenting, to their looking for solutions as we explore our beautiful blue planet. So there are still a lot of events coming up tomorrow. We have a full day schedule. If you visit exploringbytheseat.com/Ocean Week, you can find everything we have on deck for tomorrow. Register for your classroom, snag some spots, and we hope to see you on our final day of World Ocean Week tomorrow. So we have an amazing guest here joining us to wrap up our day of broadcasting. We've got Victor Vescovo joining us. So after traveling 47,000 miles and completing 39 dives, the 5 Deeps expedition reached a successful conclusion. The first manned descent to the deepest point of each of the world's 5 oceans. It was the brainchild of extreme explorer Victor Vescovo. He has done a little bit of other exploration over his time, skiing to both poles, climbing the highest peaks on each continent. He's an accomplished pilot of jet fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, and of course, manned submersibles. And he's the first person in history to have been to the top of all the world's continents, as well as the bottom of all its oceans. So Victor, it's so great to have you joining us live in the map room at the Explorers Club today. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much, Joe. Appreciate that introduction.
Excellent. Well, Victor, this is the first time we've hosted you on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. It's great to be able to do it in person like this. Usually we're doing virtual connections, which are fun, but it's nice to be with a person and to do this. So I'm going to let you take over for a little bit. We'll pull your presentation up when you're ready. And then we've got loads of questions ready from the classrooms.
Okay. Well, I think it'd be best just to jump in. We'll probably spend about 30 minutes going through my materials, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Perfect. All right. Let's get that on deck here. Let's go entire screen. And we should see it come up now. All right. You're in control, my friend.
And I will advance by using this. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you all. I'm going to go through the material pretty quickly because people can assimilate information much more rapidly than I think people expect. So that's me, and that's the submersible limiting factor, which we dove extensively for 4 years. And I'll get into why we did it and how we went about it. Great quote. Arthur C. Clarke, a great science fiction author, said, "How inappropriate to call this planet Earth when it is clearly ocean." And that is an actual shot of the Earth taking the clouds out, which shows you the vast expanse from the Pacific. 71% of our planet is ocean. And believe it or not, 75% of the world's ocean is completely unexplored. So if you do the basic math, more than half of our planet Earth is still completely unexplored, which is extraordinary. And hopefully you'll be part of the generation that can help us explore the other half. If you look at the ocean, believe it or not, if you took the average place on the planet Earth, because 71% of it is ocean and most of it is pretty darn deep, the average point on the planet is about 4,000 meters, 13,000 feet underwater. That is the average place. So really, the world is all about its ocean. Now, I'm going to go real quickly through the 5 Deeps expedition, which Joe was kind enough to mention, the first expedition to the bottom of all 5 of the world's oceans. Then I'll talk about what we did in the following years from 2020 to 2022, which we called mostly the Ring of Fire expeditions. The Ring of Fire being the ring that surrounds the Pacific Ocean with all the volcanic activity and deep ocean trenches. Okay, so why did we do the 5 Deeps expedition? Well, really, I'm a technologist. I'm not a marine scientist, biologist, or anything. I just was very curious. Would it be possible to build a submersible that could repeatedly go to the bottom of the ocean, which had never been done before? There was a science element. In doing so, building such a vehicle and going to the bottom of all these oceans, we would inevitably find new species and new things that scientists would be very interested in. So that was exciting. And then there was the mapping. As I mentioned, most of the ocean floor is completely unexplored. And I love maps, and it would be a great opportunity to actually locate the deepest point in 5 of the world's oceans, which we didn't know in 2016 when we started the expedition. We only knew the bottom of one ocean, in the Pacific. The other ones we had to map and find them. Okay, so what did you need? You needed an FOD, or full ocean depth submersible. And that is a sub that can go down to 11,000 meters, or over 35,000 feet, much deeper than Everest is high. You need a support ship and landers and sonar to map the seafloor and then go and actually explore these areas. You need a team to actually maintain the submersible, guide the ship, prepare meals. It's a big endeavor. It took upwards of 49 or 50 people on our expeditions when we went out into the oceans. And it requires funding, a lot of funding. I simplified that by just paying for everything myself, which was not a small amount of money, but it gave me a lot of control and allowed us to do things very quickly. And I didn't have to answer to anyone. I could just make decisions and we would move forward. That's a big advantage. So why us? Well, you know what? No one had ever been to the bottom of all 5 of the world's oceans. And I have to confess, it was almost as if it kind of was objectionable to me. I mean, I couldn't believe we hadn't done that as a species. And so I come from a culture in Texas where we said, you know what? Some things need doing, and if no one's not doing them, why don't you step up and do them yourself? And so, to be quite frank, that's kind of what I set out to do. And I don't believe that government can do everything. It's always, oh, government should do this, government should do that. And we're a little independent down in Texas. And I thought it would be faster and better done by private enterprise, by my own project. Okay. So yeah, if not me or us, who? And you should approach, I think, a lot of things in life that way. You can't just beggar off on other people important things that need to be done. You need to take personal responsibility for things that you think are important that need to be done and go do them. So that's the limiting factor. The original design, kind of on a blank sheet of paper that we worked out, it was going to be a 2-person submersible, and basically spent the money and had the expertise to build that core area in the center out of titanium. And no submersible to go down to the bottom of the ocean had ever been built out of titanium before. They had been made out of steel. Well, titanium is only half the weight of steel, so that allowed it to be a little bit lighter and allowed us to put 2 people there instead of just 1. And you can see it looks like it has an odd shape, but it was designed to go up and down in the water very efficiently, not side to side, because we really didn't need to go fast side to side. So how did we actually design it? Well, you start with the people. That's me, going to be the pilot. There'd be 1 passenger, and it looks kind of cramped, but it's like being in the cockpit of a business jet or something like that. If you're claustrophobic, you probably don't want to go in a deep ocean submersible, because we were in there upwards of 14 hours or so. And then you build the submarine around the 2 people. The electronics, those are oxygen tanks that had 4 days of oxygen supply. You are encased in titanium, basically a big ball that's about 90 millimeters thick of titanium. And then you actually have to put a hatch in there, 3 viewports, which was probably the trickiest part of the sub design, because those actually were compressed into the rest of the submersible as it went deeper and deeper, upwards of 1/4 of an inch in compression. And then when we came back to the surface, they'd spring back to their original shape. But that was pretty important so we could see what was going on outside. And then you built the submarine around that pressure vessel. So you had a frame to hold everything in place. You had straps to lift this big, heavy titanium ball. You put thrusters on board. You had 6 powerful batteries to power the thrusters. And then you had what's called syntactic foam, which is a substance that doesn't compress under the extreme 16,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, but actually floats in water. So that gave the whole submersible buoyancy. We put on a manipulator arm, which you can see down there, which allowed us to retrieve rocks and other specimens. There, it can extend itself and pick things up. And then on the bottom, we would have the surfacing weights, which allowed us to actually descend in the water, and then to come back, we would drop those weights. Now, don't think it's pollution. They're made out of steel, raw steel. So over time, the bacteria in the ocean break them down, just like they do any steel wreck. And they actually use it as food. It takes a long time, but it is biodegradable. That gets complicated how we actually drop some weights to make things go slower. We had cameras, we have modems, and then you put a shell around it to make it very efficient going up and down the water column. Then you had a trunk that you had to climb through to get into the capsule. So actually that was a limiting issue for people trying to get in the sub, is you had to be kind of thin and you had to be able to get in there. Then we put some communications equipment on the surface so we could talk to the ship above us. You drop the weights when you need to go home. And in an emergency, we could drop the batteries, which were really heavy. We could drop the thrusters if they got entangled with something. So it made the submersible extremely safe. I was extremely confident no matter what happened that I would be able to come home. And that's what it looked like when it was machined. It was almost a perfect sphere. We had to build test chambers to test every single component of the submersible to 14,000 meter of pressure. So we had a little bit of an overage to make sure that they were all safe and they wouldn't implode like a hand grenade going off when we got to full ocean depth. We didn't have any navigation because radio doesn't work underwater. There's no GPS. You can't take your phone with you and find out where you are. So we had to develop landers that would sit on the bottom of the ocean and use sound waves to talk to the submersible to help guide it when it got to the bottom. It took a lot of math. But what we were able to develop was something like GPS, but it was based on sound waves, not radio waves. That was the ship that I purchased from the Navy that we re-equipped to be a submersible carrier on the back end. And it could hold about 49 people. It could go all over the world and it could go to polar regions, which was important because we went to some pretty cold areas. That's what it looked like before we started refurbishing it, which was a almost 2-year endeavor. You got to be patient to be an explorer. That's what it looked like after. Looks a lot better. That's the back of the ship before we built a hangar for the submersible. And that's what it looked like afterwards in the Pacific Ocean. So it takes a lot of work and a lot of what other people would consider boring stuff, but that's all the support infrastructure that you need to do these very difficult things. And then we took it around the world, 43,000 miles in 10 months. That's the submarine on the left being deployed from the back of the ship. It would be lowered into the water. And as I said, we went to some very cold regions where there were icebergs and whales and other things, but we were going to some pretty remote places to dive to the bottom of the oceans. And this was the 5 Deeps expedition itself. We started there on the left at the Atlantic Ocean. We made the first human descent to the very absolute bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Then we went south to the Southern Ocean. And first we had to map it to find the deepest point there. We were able to dive that. And then we had to figure out where the deepest point in the Indian Ocean was. So it could have been 2 places. So we had to map both those areas. And it turned out to be off the coast of Indonesia. So then we dove that. And then we went to the deepest point in the ocean, the Challenger Deep in the Pacific Ocean. And we made 4 dives there in 10 days. And previously, no one had ever dived it more than 1 time. So we were very happy technologically that we were able to do that. And then there was another place in the Pacific that was really close to being the deepest point. It's called the Horizon Deep in the Tonga Trench down there at the right, near the bottom. And we dove that one. And it was only about 110 meters shallower than the deepest point, the Challenger Deep. But we had to check it out anyway. So we had to be thorough. And then we crossed the Pacific, went through the Panama Canal. We stopped by and dove on the Titanic 5 times because it was on the way. And then we went to the Arctic Ocean and dove to the very bottom of the Arctic Ocean. And that was the completion of the 5 Deeps. So big hurdles we overcame. We had to build a submarine from scratch that could do things no submersible had ever done. We had to refine all the processes to launch it and recover it safely. We didn't have a single serious injury on our entire expeditions, which we're extremely proud of. And this is actually something that's really annoying, but the most difficult thing was actually just getting permits from governments to dive in their waters to go down to these deep areas. That could take upwards of a year or even 2 years and a lot of difficulties. So never underestimate the power of paperwork and administration to act as a barrier to exploration. You can't just decide to go somewhere sometimes and go do it anymore. You have to get permission. We had to have a big mapping capability on the ship. And the way you map the seafloor is you shoot sound waves from your ship, like up there at top. It bounces along the bottom. You get the data from those bounces, and slowly over time, you build up an image of the seafloor, just like you see there. And when you're done, you end up having a multi-beam creation of the seafloor. It's a slow process, and it takes a lot of time. And that's an example of some of the maps we were able to generate at the Indian Ocean. And when we got to the Indian Ocean, no one really knew where the deepest point was. Some people thought it was off to the left. Some people thought it was off to the right. That wasn't it. It turned out that the deepest point in the Indian Ocean was right smack in the center. And so that's where we ended up diving after we had mapped the entire length of the Java Trench over 10 days, over 400 miles long. Okay, so in summary, what did we do on the 5 deeps? We collected over 600,000 square kilometers of mapping data. That's larger than the area of France and Iceland combined. We added 300,000 more kilometers, about the size of Italy. And then we actually discovered 80 seafloor features that had never been identified before. And the rule of the road is we get to name them. So I've actually personally named over, at this point, about 60 seafloor features, which is pretty cool. And we're going to give all the data that we collected to the charitable organization that keeps the map of the seafloor. It's called JEBCO. So what do we do in science? Well, we actually had these things called landers, which were robots that would dive down with the submersible. They would just sit on the bottom. They wouldn't move around, but they would collect video. They would collect samples. They acted as navigation beacons for the submersible. They were invaluable, and there were 3 of them. They were kind of like my little pet dogs that went down with me and helped me out. They also collected water. They collected soil samples. They were just incredibly useful, but that's the boring stuff of science that has to get done for it to be really productive. It's not just about the bell of the ball, the submersible. The landers did a lot of the work. What did we find? Well, we did 100 deployments of our landers. On the right there, we actually recorded the deepest octopus ever recorded. We collected water at every deep, have hundreds of hours of high definition video of places no one has ever seen before. We discovered probably over 40 new species because no one had been to these places. And when you go where no one's ever been, you're going to find some new stuff and some other cool stuff. Other geological highlights, just beautiful maps created of fracture zones and fault lines, the kinds of things that start earthquakes and tsunamis in the Pacific and other places. And here's a map of what it looks like when you build a big bathymetry map that's never been built before. That's what the Java Trench looks like, and no one had ever made that map before. And then we're going to be able, hopefully, this is a video of the deepest place in the ocean, the Challenger Deep of the Mariana Trench. And that map was created by our ship, multiple passes to create this 3D rendering. And right there in the center, you can see the deepest point on the planet. It's almost like a gash in the earth that goes down 35,000 feet of water. So yeah, it's just an amazing feature. It's bigger than some of the mountain ranges in the world, but it's inverted. Okay, we captured the first rock from the very deepest point in the ocean, and we were able to bring it back, and we were able to show that there's actually life living on these rocks, even though there's no sunlight to give them energy. They actually get energy by having chemical reactions from the minerals in the rocks and basically eating the methane gas that is coming out of the rocks. So a completely different form of life than we have up here on the land. And we were able to bring back evidence of it. Okay. That's a good shot of what a lander looks like when it's resting on the very bottom of the ocean. I took a picture of it, and it was taking a picture of me. And there's a very deep water fish off to the left there. There's the submarine from the lander. It was taking a picture of me. And what you see in the foreground are a whole bunch of very deep water amphipods or shrimp at the very bottom of the ocean. And they're consuming a fish that we strapped to the lander that to them was a feast because they never see anything that big down there that they can eat. So they were having a great time. This is an example of Antarctica from space. And it shows you when we went to the Southern Ocean, we actually had to map and dive the very deepest point of that incredibly remote place, the South Sandwich Trench. And no one goes there. There had been only one research ship in history that had ever gone down there. And we were able to get there and map the whole trench, which is fun. This is what it kind of looks like when you're cruising on the bottom of the ocean. We have thrusters that move the submersible along the bottom. We send out sonar beams and it maps all the area around us so we can figure out what's in front of us and what's behind us and explore. This is one of the strangest things we ever saw. Off to the left, it looks like a glowing bag. It was some kind of strange jellyfish, but that's not really what it was. And you can see how it basically started floating towards the lander. And then right in front of the lander, it does a 90-degree turn and proceeds onward. It has like a cable extending from it. This had never been seen before. This is absolutely a new species. And we nicknamed it Snoop Dogg because it kind of looks like a dog's head. But usually creatures like this, they're anchored in place. They don't move. And so this was just something that we're still trying to figure out how it lives, what to call it, all sorts of things. This is also really strange. You may not be able to see it very well, but something, I'm going to start it in a second, and it's going to drift from right to left. And it looks like a structure. Let's see if you can see it. Do you see it drifting from left to right? That was a colony of tiny creatures almost in a spiral structure. And this is at the very bottom of the ocean. No one had ever seen that before, and they self-assembled into a geometric structure. It just blew us away when we saw that on the film. So there are a lot of mysteries of the deep that you see even just by temporarily visiting there. And it's a wonderful experience to explore the world. This is the ship when we were at South Georgia Island, some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen in my life. And you only see it if you get out of your house and you go explore. Went to the Titanic. That's what it looked like on the sonar. There's the bow of the Titanic when I was approaching it for the first time. This is what it looked like when we got up close with the cameras and the viewports. I made 3 dives to Titanic. And the takeaways. Deep marine research is needed. We need to catalog what's in the ocean, the threats to it from, man-derived pollution and other things. There's biology, there's geology. If you want to do marine geology, there's plenty of that. We're doing mapping, so there's hydrography and cartography. We're looking at climate change through climatology, and we're even looking at wrecks, which is archaeology. So when you go into the ocean, there are so many different parts of science that you can engage. And people keep asking, well, why do you use a manned submarine or put people in it? Why don't you just use robots? Well, the deeper you go, you usually have to have a tether or a rope attaching the sub to the ship. Well, the deeper you go, that gets really, really long and really heavy, and it becomes a risk. So it has to be detached. So now, can you build a robot that can do everything a human can do? And not really, because it's really dangerous down there. And you need a pilot to guide the submarine in dangerous waters. So you need a person in the loop. And it's also extraordinary to directly interact with the environment when something is literally just a couple of feet away from you. It's just not the same as when you're looking on a screen that a robot is somewhere else. I think as the great film director James Cameron said, he said, no one wants to grow up to be a robot, but they do grow up wanting to be explorers. And trust me, there is nothing like actually being in the environment that you're exploring. That's why we have people in submarines and why we will continue to do so. And it engages the public. It's one thing for a robot to go down and discover something. Yes, that's interesting. But for a human being to go off and do it, it's more extraordinary and much more engaging for the public. We had robots visit the moon, but when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon in 1969, that was a big deal. Just like when hopefully someone's going to land on Mars in your lifetimes. That's going to be a big deal. We've had robots do it, but it's going to be different when a human does it. I don't think we have a lot more time, so I'm going to just go really quickly through a lot of these other slides about some of the other things that we did. We went all over the Mediterranean Sea and the Indian Ocean after we did the 5 Deeps expedition. We visited the wreck of a French submarine, and it went down in the 1960s for unknown reasons. Well, I was able to take a French admiral down there. You see him on the left, and he used to have command of a submarine like that. And by thorough investigation of the wreck from the submersible, we were able to figure out what happened to it. And what happened to it? Unbelievably, it actually got run over by a container ship, and it snapped the top of the submarine and flooded it. And we weren't able to determine that until we saw the wreckage directly. And there it is. You can see how the part on the right, some of the tubes are snapped backwards. So we were able to figure out what happened. And we laid a plaque to the crew that was lost by the son of the commanding officer who was in the submersible with me. So that was a special event as well. And you could only do that with a manned submersible or a woman submersible, however you want to phrase it. I was able to take down the Prince of Monaco into the bottom of the Mediterranean. He had never been that deep before, so he's now the deepest diving head of state. And he was able to see what that was like. That's a map of the Calypso Deep, which we visited. Then we went to the Red Sea, and no one had ever been to the very bottom of the Red Sea. So I invited a wonderful Saudi Arabian engineer with me, and this is what it looks like to journey along the bottom of the Red Sea. You can see some pieces of rock that are coming out of the bottom. They're almost like reverse stalagmites. You see some white debris that's salt. It's so salty in the Red Sea that it comes out of solution and kind of acts like an underwater beach with salt. It's just very strange. You see strange formations like this. So you're cruising along the bottom in the submersible, and those are colonies of creatures that are living in incredibly salty water. And we only saw this in the Red Sea. Extraordinary places. Then we went back to the Pacific. I took down the first woman in history to the bottom of the ocean, Dr. Kathy Sullivan, the first American female spacewalker. Then we did a lot of mapping in the northern part of the Pacific. There's Kathy. She was the first woman down. And then I took down the son of the first person at the bottom of the ocean. I took down Kelly Walsh. We did a lot more mapping. We found huge volcanoes that had never been mapped before. We got to name them. We found all sorts of wildlife, crabs, sea urchins, even octopus, everything. In fact, on our expeditions, we found the deepest octopus ever, the deepest fish, the deepest amphipod, the deepest everything, because we were able to go so deep. And then we went back to the Pacific the following year. We dove about 7 more deep ocean trenches that had never been visited before. We actually did the first full ascent of Mauna Kea, the highest mountain in Hawaii, but it's actually technically the highest mountain in the world. It's just that half of it is underwater. So we started at the bottom in the submarine, at the very bottom of the mountain, under about 5,000 meters of water. We floated to the surface. Myself and the local Hawaiian, we paddled all the way to shore. So we didn't use any internal combustion engines. We used our own manpower. We went on bikes, and then we went 20 miles and then climbed to the summit. So it was the first full ascent of technically the highest mountain on planet Earth, including the parts that are underwater. So we thought that was a fun experience. We did the deepest dive in the Philippine Trench with a local member of the Philippine scientific community. There he is, Dr. Dio Onda with the Philippine flag. And then we found at the time the deepest shipwreck in history, the USS Johnston, at about 6,000 meters. We tracked it by looking for debris from it, and then we found more debris, and then we basically tracked it down, and on sonar we saw part of the ship, and eventually we saw the bow. So back in 2021, this was the deepest shipwreck ever discovered. But the following year, that's the Johnston, the following year we went back to find one of its sister ships. Oh, a little interlude. We went to the bottom of the Kermadec Trench off of New Zealand, another 10,000 meter trench that no one had ever been to before. The Chinese were there just the following year, so we were able to get there before they did. We went to the Atacama Trench, the deepest trench off of South America, and that was a first. And we saw some amazing colonies of life forms there that were different. And then in 2022, we went back to the Philippine Trench, and then we found the deepest shipwreck currently in history, the Samuel B. Roberts. We found bacteria colonies at 10,800 meters. These are the deepest colonies of life ever recorded on Earth. You see them in yellow. They're literally like sticky areas of the rocks, but those are living organisms living in colonies. We mentioned we brung up the deepest rock. But what was interesting, we then took this to an electron microscope facility, and we took a really, really close look at the surface of the rock. And this is what we found. We found tiny, tiny elements of life coming out of the rock. You can see one that at the bottom left had a stalk and a head. These are microscopic creatures living at over 10,000 meters. An even closer look. These are colonies of life. Yes, they're very, very small, but I believe that if we find life on other planets, like in the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, it's going to look like this. It's not going to look like lions or bears or anything like that. It's going to look like this, but it is life. These are living organisms that are reproducing, that are living lives just in a very small and intense environment. Won't get into some of the technological things we did. We developed new sonar capabilities. There are only 2 submarines in the world that can go to the very bottom of the ocean. the one that we built, and one called the Fenju that is owned by the Chinese government. And they're kind of quiet about what they do with it. Okay. What's really cool about exploration is that the first dive to the bottom of the ocean, down at the bottom left, was by the Trieste. 2 people did it, Dr. Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard. And then no one did it until director Jim Cameron, who directed the Titanic. He went in 2012. And then we started diving in 2019. And now more than 20 people have been to the bottom of the ocean. So as you advance technology, you're providing more and more access to the deepest reaches of our planet. And hopefully this will continue. So a new door has been opened and anyone can go down to the bottom of the ocean. And so that's it. Thank you all very much for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take some questions.
All right, Victor, thank you for that incredible presentation. Let me bring us back from our screen share, and then let's spend a little time in a little Q&A action. All right. There we go. Perfect.
Oh, I have a globe coming out of my head.
I've got some questions here from the YouTube chat. I've also had some students, because Central and Eastern classrooms have ended for the day, but I had them send questions in advance. So I've got lots of questions here queued up for us. So let's get right into some of them. All right. Perfect. So we had a kindergarten class in Stratford in Ontario, and they had a few questions here.
Cool.
So they're wondering, well, I think as the first question that would probably come to a kindergartner is, was it scary? Were you nervous?
I was scary the first time we went really, really deep in the submersible because there's no place to test it. It was too big. And there was no facility on planet Earth that could create the conditions of the bottom of the ocean in like a chamber. So the first time I took it down was the first time it was fully assembled. So I was a little nervous, but I had a lot of faith in its construction and it went very well.
All right. Well, I know it was well constructed because we connected with Dawn Wright earlier today, and she's been in a few submersibles, and a student asked her what was the most comfortable one she'd ever been in. She said it was yours.
Yeah.
So clearly it was well constructed.
Yep.
All right. So timing, they want to know how long it took you to get to the depth.
Sure. To go to the very bottom of the ocean in the submersible that we designed and built, it would take about 4.5 hours to go to the bottom. And then we would typically spend between 2 and 4 hours on the bottom, and then it would take about 4 hours to come back up. So on the longest missions, we would be in that submersible next to each other, getting very, very cold for about 12 or 13 hours. So that's a long day, and you get kind of dehydrated.
All right. Some second graders in Edmonton are eager to know if you saw any sharks on any of the dives.
I did. Actually, they only live at relatively shallow depths compared to where we dive. They live in the first 1,000 meters or so out of 11,000. But there were a couple of times when I got to the surface and a couple of sharks were circling the submersible. I think they were curious what it was, but I actually had to warn the divers that go into the water to reattach the sub to the ship to get it out of the water. I had to warn them that there were sharks in the water. And what they would do is they would actually try and distract them away, or they would just spend as little time as possible. And they certainly wouldn't splash around a lot to, make the sharks excited. But yeah, we did have sharks and we did have to deal with it.
All right. So some fourth graders here, I'm going to switch over to YouTube to get their question. They would like to know, you talked about the submersible and the landers, but was there any gear you had to bring into the submersible with you that was important?
Yeah, one thing we often did was we brought our, just like you guys or anybody else, we brought our cell phones. Why? They have very good cameras. And so any number of things can happen to the camera systems on a submersible. They could get damaged. They could succumb to the pressure and no longer work. So we used our cell phones to take pictures from inside the submersible to show where we went. And if there was something really important that we wanted to show, it wouldn't be as good as a picture from a submarine camera, but at least we would have it. So that was important. We brought food and, a little bit of drink, stuff like that. So, but really we had everything we needed in the sub.
All right. Well, this question comes up. It doesn't matter if you're an ocean rower or an astronaut. This is from a 6th grade class. They're wondering about, you were down a long time. How did you go to the bathroom?
Okay. Well, you don't. What we ended up doing is you can train yourself to basically not really need to go by basically not drinking anything about 12 hours before you would go in the sub. You would dehydrate yourself. So there's nothing really that needs to leave you. And you don't eat a lot either. And you certainly don't start drinking and eating a lot when you're on a mission. You're busy anyway. So by the time you come back, you're pretty thirsty and you're really hungry. But the idea is just to not really need to. Now, if there was an emergency, yes, you would actually, turn to the side and use what we call a relief bottle. And, you get very, close to the people that you're with, and you're human beings. So it's something really embarrassing. You just take care of what you need to take care of. And so, yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot, but look, we're all human beings, and, it's a natural process. And it's just, if you properly train yourself, you don't really need to. And you never did.
All right. But Nora here in California would like to know, do you use, so obviously you use submersible, but are you a scuba diver as well? And do you have like a cool story or experience?
Yeah, I actually started in the ocean by learning how to scuba dive when I went to school in California. So I learned how to scuba dive in Monterey Bay. And one of the cool things about Monterey Bay, California, is that they have kelp forests. And in the kelp forests are otters, and otters swim and live there. And I'll never forget, I was on one of my very first scuba dives, and I almost ran into an otter who was just as surprised to see me. And he swam around me several times, and we just had a wonderful time swimming together underwater. And that was one of my first experiences. And it really just brought to home just how amazing life and the oceans are. And it's just so different than doing anything on land. And that's kind of got me hooked a little bit.
All right. Our kindergarten class in Stratford has another question here about what kind of things did you do to stay safe?
Oh, we did a lot of things to stay very, very safe. Most importantly is that I gave the power to anyone on the ship that they had the right to stop what we were doing at any time if they detected anything that was unsafe. And that included the people that were maintaining the submersible, where if something was broken and they didn't think it was safe, they could stop a mission. And yes, that caused a lot of delays and some hard feelings sometimes. But at the end of the day, I'm extremely proud that in 4 years of intensive operation in some of the harshest environments on our planet, we never had a serious incident involving safety. And we had one close call when we were testing the submersible. A cable on the ship broke, but that was something that was not really foreseeable and just part of the things. But you never really want to push things to where you're being reckless or unsafe. So we had checklist after checklist. We inspected the sub before and after every dive. We were very, very detail oriented, but that's what you have to do. You can't just wing these things and just, oh, let's go dive today. Oh, that's fine. Or you have to be very, very specific and very detail oriented, and then you come back safe.
All right. Actually, this question's come several times. Anglerfish. So several classrooms want to know if you saw anglerfish.
Did not see an anglerfish. I think they're kind of shy, even though they look really scary. A lot of the scary looking monsters in the deep ocean, one, they're kind of hard to see. Those lights that they have are very, very dim. And when the sub was in the water, I think that they could sense how large it was. It was a 12-ton vessel. And I think they thought we were a predator. So I think in many cases, the fish were kind of nervous to be around our vessel, so they would swim away.
All right. And then the question about the lights, did you use them all the way down or only on the bottom?
We used, that's a good question. Actually, no one's asked me that before. We would only use 1 or 2 of them on the way down to conserve power. And we really didn't need a lot of lights. And there really wasn't that much to see after the first 1,000 meters. But yes, absolutely. When we would get close to the bottom, we would light it all up so we could see and capture on video everything possible. And it would use more battery power, but that's what we were there for.
Yeah. All right. I like this question from some grade 8s about resiliency. So you've had to have some times where you've wanted in anything, whether it's mountain climbing or ocean exploration, where you've wanted to just call it quits. How do you push through those moments?
Yeah, especially in mountain climbing. That's probably the most difficult thing I've ever done, and definitely the most dangerous. So any of you out there that are thinking of becoming mountain climbers, think twice and think hard about it. And by all means, get really good training, because it's easily the most dangerous thing I've ever done in terms of expeditions is mountain climbing. Okay, that said, you know what? At the end of the day, your body is always going to complain. and it's going to complain when you're uncomfortable, and it's going to tell you to stop when you're really uncomfortable. And when you're exhausted, tired, and even hurt, it's going to want to just stop. But your mind controls your body. You can train your mind to say, okay, body, I hear that you're uncomfortable, but we're going to do this anyway. And it's about picking yourself up and having determination. You can train your mind to overcome incredible adversity. You can go without eating for almost a week or even longer. You can go without water for days at a time. It's really unpleasant, but you can push through that. Look at what the SEAL commandos do, the training they go through. They can do extraordinary things under horrible conditions, but it's because their minds are so strong. And so over time, you train yourself to not ignore your body, but just, you listen to it, but you do what you need to do. And you go about your business and you execute the mission and you do it as safely as possible. Your mind controls your body, not the other way around. If you let it be the other way around, you're going to be a victim of your body your whole life. And that's no way to live.
All right. 6th graders in Virginia want to know, do any of the new species have names yet?
Yes, a few of them. I did not name those because I'm not a scientist, but our chief scientist is in the process, I think, of naming several of them. And on an expedition previous to the one we were on, he found an amphipod, like a shrimp-like creature in the very deep trench, and it actually had plastic in its stomach, which was really sad to discover. But to make a point, he named that new species, I think it's called Erythematist plasticis. He put the word plastic in the name of the species because it was found with plastic in its stomach. And he did that to make a point that we are contaminating our oceans in a very profound way, and we need to do better.
All right. Final question for you, Victor. Inspiration. What drives you to push yourself and explore these new places?
I think part of it is genetic. I've always been really, really curious. I was that kid who would just run off and go exploring in the forest or try to drive any vehicle I could get my hands on. It's just part of my nature. Some people are like that. Some people are less adventurous. But I think I was also encouraged to explore by my parents and by my friends. And I didn't get a lot of no's or no, you can't do that, or no, that's too hard. I was surrounded by people that said, oh, sure, yeah, you could do that. You could try to do that. A very encouraging, supportive environment. And I think that allows you to take risks. Did I get hurt a few times? Yeah, absolutely. But I didn't get killed, thank heavens. But I think you just need people around you that encourage you, that don't try to tell you what you can't do. Surround yourself with good people that encourage you to do difficult and challenging things, and you'll have a much more rewarding life.
All right. I want to start off with a shout out to our classrooms. Thank you so much for all the great questions today. Please join us tomorrow. We have about 4 more live events to wrap up our World Ocean Week events with the Explorers Club. And Victor, it's such a pleasure to have you host you with us for the very first time. We hope to have you join us again. And thank you so much for sharing some of your adventures and some of the things you learned on those adventures with our classrooms today.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to see you all, and keep exploring.
All right, we're going to sign off for today.